Well, good morning, everyone. It is 10 o'clock, and welcome today to our monthly webinar series, Beyond the Field. I'm your moderator, Amanda McLean, the Farm Management Specialist here at North Dakota Farmers Union. Today's topic, as mentioned earlier last month, was originally going to be the Conservation Reserve Program, or the CRP, with the state FSA office. But due to current federal freezing and uncertainty of when the actual general CRP will be open, it was in the best decision that we would postpone that webinar topic until further notice. With that, today we will be covering rural behavioral health awareness with Dr. Sean Brothersome from NDSU. A few housekeeping tips before we get started. Everyone is on mute, but if at any time you have any questions or comments, please feel free to type them into the chat or the Q&A box. We will also have time for Q&A with Sean at the end of today's presentation. Also, this webinar is being recorded. You can find it by going onto YouTube and searching NDFU. You can also find our previous recordings on that YouTube channel. As always, I will be sending everyone a follow-up email with this presentation and the direct link to this recording. Please allow for a few days. Also, we really ask that you please take the exit survey after this webinar. It helps us to continue to improve these webinars and ideas for future content that you guys would be interested in that. With that, I would like to turn it over to our speaker, Dr. Sean Brothersome. Dr. Brothersome, he earned his master's in family science from Brigham Young University and a PhD in health development and family studies at Oregon State University. He has been working for NDSU since 1998. He has conducted research and development educational resources and programs on marriage, parenting, rural stress, grief, and other family-related topics. In this area around farm stress, he has authorized publications such as Farming and Ranching in Tough Times and Making Family Decisions in Farming and Ranching. With that, I will turn it over to you, Sean.
Thank you, Amanda. Good to be on with everyone today who is joining us for this webinar that's hosted by North Dakota Farmers Union. NDSU Extension, which I represent, is delighted to partner with North Dakota Farmers Union to be able to provide educational information and resources to citizens across the state of North Dakota. And so we very much appreciate you joining us for this opportunity this morning. We'll go till 11 a.m. Our topic today is exploring challenges and solutions during times of farm stress. And as you think about this topic, I'm occasionally asked by people who work in the world of agriculture, is there ever a time that there's not farm stress? And I tell them no. There's always something going on when you're working in the world of agriculture. There might be a storm coming in, or it might be harvest time and you've got some long hours to put in, or maybe the markets are doing something that is unexpected. And so agriculture by its nature tends to be a field in which there's different varieties of stress that are occurring on a regular basis. So we're going to talk about some of those issues today, and specifically how we can understand some of those stresses and be responsive, particularly in terms of prioritizing human health and human wellness in that kind of experience. So that's kind of the direction that we're going to go today. As Amanda mentioned, I have been at NDSU since 1998, and my role as the extension specialist for family life issues is to develop educational resources and programs on a range of issues that can affect the well-being of individuals and families. And I would encourage you, if you have not had the opportunity either to explore the resources available through NDSU Extension, or to connect with your local county extension office or your regional extension center and REC, I'd encourage you to do that, because those are great resources for folks in the areas of agriculture, natural resources, and family living. So just want to point that out as a resource in your local area, and NDSU Extension is working every day to try and provide those supports. So let's kind of jump in and get started. See if I can advance my slide and get things rolling this morning. Um, so kind of thinking a little bit about this topic and why we're addressing it. When you think about the issue of farm or ranch stress, we typically start from thinking about what are things that we can do. We wonder if there's anything we can do to make a meaningful difference in our own individual experience and the experience within our farm or ranch operation or those around us. And then also consider, well, where am I starting from with this topic? So I thought I'd just give a brief background. I think it's really common to think about what can we do. Um, Speaking about experience with this topic, I do a lot of academic work around this particular area, but my initial background, I was born here in the Midwest in Iowa, and then grew up primarily in central and eastern Utah. And a lot of my experience there was involved with a multi-generational family ranching operation. Our family has a big beef cattle operation. We also raise sheep and alfalfa hay. And so growing up, that was my experience in agriculture, working to raise livestock, focused on their health. I'm doing a lot of ranch work, building a lot of fences, and so that was my experience on a regular basis when I was growing up, and I loved that experience. And then later, as I went through schooling and came to NDSU, have gotten quite involved since 1998 in research and programming around the issue of stresses in agriculture and its effects on mental and behavioral health. And I often go back to my experiences growing up in agriculture as I think about some of the challenges that might be dealt with for individuals working in agriculture. In our livestock operation, for example, um, one of my regular jobs was to spend time with our cattle, uh, pay attention to how they were doing, their physical health and well-being. And when I would find a cow that was sick or a calf that was sick, I often face this first question that's asked here: what can I do? Is there an answer? If this cow is lame, what steps can I take to be of help? And part of my challenge, as a young person, as a teenager, was learning those things I need to pay attention to. What are the signs that a cow is sick or is lame? And then thinking about what are the resources available to me and how do I use them in a way that's going to improve things for this animal? And so I think similarly, when we work in agriculture, this theme of paying attention to the health of what we're doing in an agricultural operation is very common. We pay attention to the health of our crops. We pay attention to the health of our livestock. We're concerned about those things that can negatively impact their health. And so today I just want to expand that conversation a little bit to talking about the health of the individuals working in agriculture and anyone who is either directly involved in farm or ranch operations or who's working in areas to support agriculture. And in the state of North Dakota, there's been um, some community input on this topic that I want to show for just a minute that is part of the reason why we address this topic proactively within NDSU Extension. And so I'm thinking about that. In 2020, NDSU Extension held community forums across the state of North Dakota. And I'm just sharing some brief findings from 6 community forums that were done virtually. They were first planned to be in person, but then we had the COVID-19 experience. So this is from 200 plus citizens across the state of North Dakota. And the community forums were to help us identify priorities and needs for citizens in the state of North Dakota. And a couple of really clear messages came through with that. There were a lot of areas that were covered, but as the discussion was around priorities or needs for children, families, and communities, the very top issue that came up was the issue of mental and behavioral health for both youth and adults. And specific issues mentioned were at that time the COVID-19 pandemic, but also issues of the experience of depression and substance misuse. And one of the quotes that came out of this was, "We need awareness and availability of mental health resources as they're needed across the state, especially in rural areas." And so Amanda mentioned that the topic today is rural behavioral health awareness. And so kind of what we're addressing is very much in line with what citizens across the state of North Dakota at that time emphasized was an important priority. Another area that we talked about was what can we do to promote health among our citizens? And two priorities were to provide support to individuals, families, and communities through education and partnerships that focus on mental health awareness. And so that's what we're doing today with North Dakota Farmers Union. Another element was a need to focus on safe farm and ranch work environments for youth and adults. And we have a whole program out of NDSU Extension that focuses on farm safety and health. It's run by our specialist, Angie Johnson, if that's a topic of interest to you. But that also encompasses this topic of managing stress in agriculture. So moving to that particular topic, when we talk about farming and ranching, there's a lot of research that indicates that farming and ranching tends to be among the top 10 most stressful occupations in the United States. And so the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health has examined a wide range of occupations, and they found that both farm workers and farm operators tend to have a significantly higher rate of stress-related health conditions, both physical health, things like high blood pressure, heart disease, things like that, as well as mental health concerns like depression and anxiety. And so it's really important to think about what are these stressors and how can we manage them, because stress is highly associated with a range of health conditions that can negatively affect us. This particular concern is not unique to North Dakota. It's not unique to the United States. And in this next slide, I just want to show you, these are little clips from different areas of the world. The little graphic that says Farming Today or Farming Today This Week, Mental Health, that's from England. And I recently spent some time in the British Isles and spent some time in the agricultural context there. And this issue is very much in Ireland, Scotland, the UK. This issue of mental health and agriculture is very much an issue that they're dealing with. On the graphic on the right, you can see there's a man who's wearing a vest, and on the back it has a message, "Stop farmer suicide." That's from India, where farmer suicide has been a serious issue of concern. On the lower left, there's a graphic from New Zealand and about their nationwide agricultural wellness program called the FarmStrong program. And then on the lower right, there's a graphic from Australia from their National Center for Farmer Health, and it's focused on managing stress on the farm. And so I just want to point out that this issue of wellness in agriculture is a universal concern across agriculture worldwide. Thinking about this and stresses that occur commonly in agriculture, it's sometimes helpful to think about what kind of challenges are we facing? Are they temporary or are they ongoing? And it's kind of, you can liken it to running a marathon. As you think about, facing particular challenges, it's helpful to know if it's going to be a short-term or a longer-term type of thing. And I was a cross-country runner, and junior high and high school. So I had to often think about what is the length of the race that I'm trying to prepare for. And in agriculture, you have both short-term and long-term challenges. For example, during planting season, it's kind of an intensive um, term of weeks where you're trying to get your crop in the field, so to speak. That's more of a short-term but intensive type of thing. Um, well, whereas other things tend to be longer term challenges, dealing typically with, financial ups and downs in a farm or ranch operation can be a longer term thing that is just going to continue during the time that you're working in an agricultural operation. And it's really important to develop resilience, especially for those longer term challenges. Um, I, I've I've been involved with quite a bit of work on the topic of resilience among uh, uh, farm and ranch operators and their operations. And resilience actually refers to, when you define it, it's kind of like um, being able to experience stresses and hardships, but being able to bounce back from that and still function well. And so it's not the absence of stress, it's the ability to handle stress and be resilient and move forward in a positive way and preserve your health in that process. And one of the things that's important for that is understanding that you cannot be resilient in running a race, whether it's a sprint or a marathon, um, without the endurance developed to run that race and having resources available to help your endurance. And so strength and resilience in managing stress and being resilient comes from self-care practices and um, knowledge of and accessing available resources that can be of help to you. And so we'll talk about that. So the way I kind of want to approach this is kind of a question and answer um, format. I have 10 questions that have been posed to me by people on farm and ranch stress and health. And so I'll just pick those one at a time, and we'll post what the question is, and then I'll share a little bit in relation to that. We're going to start actually with a little poll that Amanda and I kind of put together, and that relates to this first question, which is what are maybe key issues related to the topic of stress, mental health, or behavioral health in your areas? And so Amanda's going to do a quick poll for us. So if you'll just take a minute and respond to the poll, it's up right now. Um, select the item that currently concerns or stresses you the most in farming. So if you'll kind of go ahead and respond to that, then we'll have a sense of what you're seeing right now in terms of key issues of stress uh, in agriculture. All right, so numbers are coming in. We've got about 60% who've responded to the poll. So we'll give you another few
And
seconds.
yep, I think we'll stop it there. Looks like most people have responded who are going to.
All right. So, Amanda, I'm assuming everybody can see those poll results.
I believe so. I'm
So
leaving
for
him up.
Yeah, for those of you who responded, um, kind of the top thing was making ends meet financially. Concerns about things like rising input costs, other things like that. The second was ability to finance the farm ranch operation at 23%. So about 65% noted those two things were kind of primary concerns, and that's very common in agriculture. Economic concerns tends to be the tip of the spear when it comes to farm and ranch stress. A third was negative market conditions, about 17%. And then down lower, you had weather concerns, potential drought, things like that. And then other or physical or mental health concerns. And so when you think about those type of things, one thing to think about is that um, some of those economic factors like market conditions, rising input costs, weather concerns, they tend to be factors that are a little bit sometimes beyond the control of the individual who is concerned about them. And so therefore it can feel more challenging to deal with. The other thing is those tend to be the things that initiate some of the stress. And then that stress from something that feels beyond your control, a weather event or a market concern, spills over into your personal life and into your physical and mental health. And so, though physical or mental health concerns related to stress may not be the first thing, they tend to be influenced by these other stresses that were identified in the poll that we just did. So thank you for responding to that. So now let's think about, okay, what are some questions of how we can respond and move forward? So, all right, so the first question is, what are some of the signs of struggle or difficulty to watch for during times of farm and ranch stress? And I mentioned earlier my experience of being a young person working on a ranch operation, needing to um, spend time among our livestock and pay attention and figure out, are there any concerns with any of these animals? Are there any health-related concerns, things where we need to catch that animal, um, provide some type of intervention, medical assistance, things like that? What are the things I need to watch for? And so, you know, I kind of got an education early on in trying to pay attention to signs of struggle or difficulty to pay attention to. So thinking similarly to that, um, when you think about warning signs of stress and tipping over into a level of concern that we need to take some action related to it, I like to use the analogy that signs of stress among ourselves as human beings are kind of like the warning signal on the dashboard of a vehicle that you drive, um, and that warn you to pay some attention. And so you can be driving a vehicle and a red light or a yellow light will pop up on your dashboard, and it just might say engine, check engine. We say that, the check engine light, so to speak. And it may not tell you exactly what the concern is, but you know that it's important for you to slow down and check on what the issue might be with the engine if you want to preserve the functionality of your vehicle and be able to rely on it for activities that you're going to be using it for. And so, um, in regards to stress, we tend to see stress warning signals, just like that warning signal on the dashboard of a car, in the physical, emotional, behavioral, and relationship aspects of our lives. Now, let's kind of maybe talk for a minute first about maybe what are some of the coping strategies, particularly negative coping strategies that people might use in response to when they're feeling stressed. Um, and so if you can maybe quickly just write in the chat, what have you maybe experienced personally or observed? What are some maybe negative coping strategies that we use in response to stress? And I'll let um, Amanda monitor the chat for just a second, and you can reply to that question. What are some negative coping strategies that we often see in response to feeling stressed? So if you
I
have a
think
chance, go ahead,
I think most
Amanda.
people are a little shy today, but yeah, I mean this is pretty sensitive
That's
topic to talk about regardless. But yeah, like binge drinking, eating, distancing themselves. So
Yeah, so there's a variety of things that you might see or experience. I know binge eating is one of mine, and so I have to make some rules about, okay, what I'm going to eat, when, things like that. You might see some things like irritability towards others. Sometimes people will spend a little money, go on a shopping spree, and just go out and try and that doesn't help when you're already maybe financially stressed, but it's not an uncommon response. Overuse of substances like alcohol or perhaps self-medication, things like that. Um, Maybe withdrawal from activities or engagement with others, where you might typically see someone come to the coffee shop or out to lunch or to church services, something like that. You may not see them. So these are some things that you may see, and these can be warning signs that something is going on with you or someone you know about or in your community, that they're dealing with levels of stress in a way that may be unhealthy. Now, when we look at some other signals of stress, going back to those areas of physical, emotional, behavioral, and relationship, physically, you want to watch for things like recurrent headaches, a lot of tension. A lot of people carry tension in their back, in their shoulders, in their neck muscles, and will have a lot of tension there. So that's something to watch for. Some people will deal um, with digestive kind of troubles and issues, stomach upset. Um, Often it will be like just low level of energy, feeling really fatigued and tired. Or if you have maybe an existing health concern, it may aggravate that health concern. You may find that a health concern becomes more problematic. And this can even something minor. My dad, for example, um, uh, longtime rancher and cowboy, and when his stress level would go up, we'd start to notice things like he'd get a rash, and he'd go to the doctor and try to figure out what's going on, and they'd spend time, and the doctor would be like, "Jack, you got too much stress going on. This is a physical response to the stress experience that you're having in life." So those are some physical signs to pay attention to. Some ways that stress shows up in our emotional experience includes things just like higher level of irritability, small things that normally would not bother you um, become something that's frustrating to you. You may have a sense of frustration, anger, or impatience about things that you're experiencing or with people around you. Sometimes the emotional experience is just a sense of discouragement, a sense of hopelessness, like I'm not sure I can keep fighting this particular challenge. Um, a sense of wanting to withdraw or isolate yourself from others. Um, and so that's not uncommon. And then anxiety or feelings of panic or indecision, confusion about what to do or how to proceed forward. That's pretty common from an emotional type of experience as well. When we look at behavioral signs of stress, you may find some things that are overlap with what we were just talking about. Sleep difficulties tend to be quite common. Either um, people having insomnia and inability to get really restful sleep, or um, just sleeping, oversleeping more than they typically would. And sometimes that's associated with depression, where people are dealing with a lot of fatigue. Some other examples with behavior, getting angry easily, mentioned that a little bit, having trouble making decisions. You might see some of those behaviors we mentioned earlier, like increased use of alcohol or other drugs or self-medication. And then things like binge eating, either overeating or maybe just loss of appetite. Someone saying, "I don't want to eat." And if you are in a family setting and someone says 2 or 3 days in a row, "I'm not hungry. I don't want to eat anything. I don't feel like eating." That can be a sign of higher levels of stress. And then finally, in relationships, you can see that there may be communication challenges, a conflict between family members or people who are working together in a farm or ranch operation, strained interactions, um, people wanting to avoid time with others, things like that. So these are all things to kind of pay attention to. Now, getting to like question number two. What role does the connection that someone has to farming or ranching as a way of life play with regard to the experience of stress? And so this is where we talk a little bit about the psychology of stress. Is rural stress different than other types of stress? And I will just answer that question directly. The answer is yes. And let me maybe explore that just for a minute. Why? And why someone's connection to farming or ranching as a way of life makes their experience of stress somewhat unique. Um, when we think about stress and why it's hard on people, it's often linked to the experience that folks have within agriculture. And this is not everyone, but I think it's true for many people who work in the context of agriculture. And so if you'll look at this particular slide and the graphic from the Progressive Farmer magazine, you'll notice that it's got three men. This is a grandfather, father, and son, and the headline says "Lasting Legacy," and it talks about their century farm, which is a wonderful thing. And I'll come back to that in a minute. But that sense of legacy, of being rooted in a generational experience, and in my family's experience, I was the fifth generation in our family ranching operation. Um, that has a very meaningful uh, sense of identity for people who have grown up with that and who are drawn to that it's something that they appreciate, it's something that they're proud of, it's something that they want to continue. Well, when we talk about stress, individual levels of stress are linked to how someone perceives the source of that stress, how their orientation to that source of stress. So, for example, I've got a brother-in-law, um, works in the field of sports management, um, pretty tough guy, and um, and I've had some experiences where we go together with our kids to see a parade, like on the 4th of July. And when there's somebody who comes by in a clown outfit, he kind of gets anxious and a little bit not normal in his response and behavior. And so I'll say, Jeff, like what's wrong? And he's like, and he'll just say, I hate clowns. I hate clowns. And I'm like, it's just it's just a guy in a costume. It's no big deal. He's like, but that's not his attitude. He just, for whatever reason, when he was growing up, he had a couple of experiences with clowns that were frightening to him. And now, when he sees them as an adult, even though he rationally knows it's just a guy in an outfit, his stress goes up much higher, and his anxiety response goes higher compared to mine. And the point I'm making about that is that two people can experience the same stress experience quite differently depending on their sense of how they relate to that particular stressor. So when we talk about in agriculture, if there is something that is threatening um, the farm operation and someone is very tied to that and their identity is very tied to that, then their sense of stress in relationship to, this stressor is threatening our farm operation and my ability to feel confident and comfortable in how we're moving ahead in our farm operation, that can be highly stressful. And if someone felt like they'd have to shift away from agriculture, they wouldn't see it necessarily as a change of job, but more as a loss of self or a loss of identity if that were to happen. And this is particularly true with men who are working in agriculture, and they often carry a sense of failure if they feel like they're not being successful in continuing the farm operation and its legacy in a way that they've been brought up to feel like is important and that they would like to continue. So this idea of being rooted in farming as a way of life and wanting to continue that can lead to what we call the 11th commandment orientation. Thou shalt farm. That and the farm becomes more important than kind of any other thing in the continuation of the farm. So this can lead to kind of what we call the born to farm mindset. And in research on this, it's been called the agrarian imperative, that I have to be involved in the farm operation. I have to continue it. There's a sense of legacy that's important that I continue for our family. And I've had a number of men, I was talking to a guy down in Minnesota a year or two ago about this, and he said, um, I cried more tears over um, he had gone through an experience where they had to come off the farm. He said, I cried more tears when I had to take the Century Farm um, sign off of our farm than I did when I lost each one of my parents. And he was not saying he didn't care about his parents. He was saying he cared a lot and was deeply connected to that experience in his family of the generational legacy on their farm. And so when we talk about the impact of farming or ranching stresses on individuals and families in agriculture, it's about way more than making enough money. It's about the sense of continuing a generational way of life that's rooted in history that people care about and they're attached to. And that's a big mental burden for people to carry with them. And so it's really important to be sensitive to if that is part of the psychology and stress that people are experiencing in agriculture. All right, question number 3. Why is managing stress effectively important for those who are working in agriculture? Well, to kind of share an analogy again about resilience, and I like to use an analogy of thinking about your equipment on a farm or ranch operation. Um, and certain types of farm activities are very dependent on the equipment that you're using. And um, particularly during times of planting season or harvest season, if you're putting in a crop, you really need your farm equipment to be functional and you depend on it. Well, similarly, it's actually for the individual working in agriculture, it's their health that is the thing they depend on to be functional and that they rely on for productivity during particular times, especially during times of more intensive experience on the farm, like planting season or harvest season. And um, uh, the graphic on the right in this slide is from a set of focus groups that were done with Australian farmers back in the early 2000s about stress. And this one guy, Harry, I like this quote. He said of himself and his farming colleagues, they maintain their tractors, they maintain their pumps and everything, but they don't maintain themselves. Speaking of not maintaining their own health. And so I'd make the argument that just as you depend on your equipment to be functional and to be resilient and get the job done on a farm or ranch operation during times like planting season, the same is true of our health. It's our most important resource that we rely on for resilience and to be functional in doing our work in agriculture. And so if you were to make a listing of assets on a farm or ranch operation, you can list land, buildings, seed, capital, I mean, different things like that. But typically, you would not list the health of the farm or ranch operator or other individuals working on the farm or ranch operation. But my argument is actually the health of individuals working on the farm or ranch operation is actually the most important asset in that operation. And when we talk about health, we mean both physical health and mental health. And if it's the most important asset, then it needs to be the most important priority. So let's talk a little bit maybe about how we care for health as a priority in agriculture. Um, so another question, how can you help someone that's so stressed that they're struggling with decisions? And so this is where we're going to do another poll really quickly. And Amanda has a little poll set up for us. And the question is, thinking about where do you fit maybe, or what community resource or source you rely on the most for support in managing stresses. And there's a list of about 6 or 7 options. So if you'll go ahead and take a second and respond to that, um, that might be a faith community, financial lender, local community. And these are more formal sources in the community. Outside of your family, people will always list family and friends first. But let's talk about what are some other settings where people look to community sources for support in managing stresses. So we've got faith community, financial lender, local community members, farm organizations like Farmers Union, others, social service organizations, healthcare providers, NDSU Extension and REC, or other. So if you'll respond to that for a minute, we've got about half of our folks who've responded. If you'll take another few seconds and respond, if you get a chance, we'd appreciate that. And it'll give us a little picture of like, where might you be looking?
All right, Sean, I'm going to close the poll.
All right, so we're at about 50%, and if you look at those results, about 40% of respondents said faith community experiences or faith communities is where they turn to for support. And I'll just note that that tends to be in North Dakota, that tends to be the highest kind of community support that people turn to. So that's really common. It's consistent with what we find. About 10% said their financial lender. About 15% said other local community supports. And then you had healthcare provider was about 20%. So these are different sources, and all of them are viable sources, both to connect with for support related to stress management or health, as well as to try and connect others with those sources. So we're going to talk just a minute about that in relationship to this question. How do I help someone that's so stressed they're struggling with decision? Well, it starts with figuring out where do they tend to look for support. And so this is from data from North Dakota asking the question, where do farmers get social support? And then thinking, where do you fit in that framework? And so a lot of people, are you a parent, a spouse, a child, a relative, or friend? Thinking about if you know someone or you yourself feel like, hey, I need some social support. And I'll note that the accessing social support, just positive connections with others, is the number one thing that you can do of immediate help when someone is dealing with stress, especially stress that feels overwhelming. And there's a lot of research that shows the level of stress comes down significantly when people feel supported, that someone is understanding their situation, extending a sense of care or support, helping them think through what to do, helping them find and access resources. And so that typically starts with family members, friends, other people who are close to us. And you can see in this graphic that for North Dakota farmers, they're typically listing friends, relatives, spouse, very high in that framework of sources. And then you've got, just as we saw in our little poll, other sources down at the bottom, like someone's faith community, lender, farm organization, that you can also think about, am I part of that network of supporting people, or where can I maybe connect them? So that's the first thing. A second thing to think about in trying to be helpful to people is thinking about, are there some barriers that people might put up in terms of just their willingness to seek assistance? This is probably the number one barrier that people experience with regard to getting help with stress management or health concerns, is just their attitude about I can do it on my own, or I don't need to seek assistance. And um, and the little graphic I have in this slide is again from the conversation with those Australian farmers who say, I would be the first to offer help, but I can't ask for it myself. And so maybe ask the question, does the person or family maybe put up barriers to seeking assistance or accessing available resources? Do they just deflect anything that might be of help to them and try to minimize it? And so part part of how you might think about being helpful is thinking about, how can I be the bridge to help someone connect with sources of support that might be helpful for them? And so part of being the bridge is things like being a good listener, encouraging people, just to avoid tough decisions when they're overly stressed out or they're overly emotional. Say, hey, you might want to sleep on this discussion before you get or get some more input from others before you make a decision. Um, kind of be clear and concise with people. Be direct. It doesn't help to beat around the bush when you're trying to connect people with resources or sources of support. Um, it's important to check in with them regularly. Uh, People may not be ready for being connected to a source of support like a counselor or something. That's okay. Be encouraging, be patient, and um, be prepared so that when someone is ready, you can help to be that bridge. And then be ready to lay out some options. What are available resources? Think down the road of, okay, what could be helpful for them? And be familiar with how you might connect them with the resource. So thinking about that a little bit. If you're going to be that bridge and make it easier for someone to access help or support, it's important to have a positive, healthy, genuine relationship with someone. People are much more likely to ask for help from someone they perceive as warm, empathetic, and genuine. And so it doesn't mean you need to feel like you need to have all the answers. That's not the point. You need to have a positive, caring relationship with someone. Second, it's really important for people to feel like that you would preserve confidentiality of anything they might share with you. Um, that's particularly important in rural settings, smaller communities where people are concerned about others getting into their business. So that's important. It's important to emphasize that mental health is an important part of overall health. That when we talk about health, we're talking not just about your physical well-being, getting good sleep, maybe lowering your weight, whatever it might be, but also focusing on your mental health. And then last, a couple more things. Again, know your resources and be prepared to refer people. And I'm going to skip to resources in just a minute, and then be ready to connect people with some of those resources. Um, okay, so now thinking, what is self-care and how can we support ourselves in times of farm stress? So quickly, self-care, and I'm going to go to a slide about this. Self-care is activities that we engage in to care for our needs. And that's the number one coping strategy that's useful to promote well-being is focusing on self-care. So that includes things like monitoring your levels of stress and engaging in some regular activities daily and weekly that can help you just focus on wellness. NDSU Extension, we have some resources to help you do this. This is an example of one. It's called 12 Tools for Your Wellness Toolbox in Times of Farm Stress. We have some other planning resources, and I've given the numbers of those publications. You can just type in NDSU Extension and that number, and it'll come up with a resource that's a wellness planning guide for you if you're working in agriculture. So those might be useful. Okay, next question. What can you expect from counseling if someone's never been, and how do you help someone be comfortable with that? So just a couple quick thoughts related to counseling. Um, if you want to help someone be comfortable with that possibility, you just need to be consistent in expressing that you think this would be a good or helpful resource for them. Often, people might be connected by someone who is in their circle of support. So, for example, I was doing a booth at a community health fair, and it was on farm stress. And a woman came up to me. She was an older woman and wanted to visit. And I said, "Well, are you working in agriculture?" She said, "No, but my son is, and I'm very concerned about him and his level of stress." And I said, "Well, would you like some information?" And she said, "Yes, please. I'd like to pass it on to him and get him connected with a counselor." So that's what I'm talking about is it may come from an individual in their life, a sister, a relative, someone like that who says, "Hey, I think this could be helpful for you." It's important to be non-judgmental with people and help people realize and communicate the message that to get help for mental health is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of wisdom that you recognize you can use some support. And the counseling experience is not about, fixing their problems. It's about helping them get tools for coping, insights, and resources or skills to manage the concerns or stresses of life. And for example, I have an adult son recently who was diagnosed with an anxiety disorder. And and we talked about his experience and as he was dealing with that and working with a counselor, after his first couple of sessions, he came back and I said, "How do you feel like you're doing?" And he said, "It's so helpful to learn some skills about how to think about this and how to manage it when it starts to feel overwhelming." Well, that's what his counseling experience was about, to learn some of those skills. We have partnered at NDSU Extension. There's a lot of health providers in North Dakota that can be of assistance. We have some federal grants to respond to farm stress from USDA to provide counseling, behavioral health and mental health counseling to agricultural populations in the state. We partnered with Together Counseling for 5 or 6 years doing this. Counseling sessions are available at no or limited cost. They've done now a couple of thousand counseling sessions through this program. Most of those are telehealth, so an individual can have a conversation with one of these counselors, and they have what's called the farm-to-farm counseling program. So they are providing counseling support services. These are individuals who have a background or familiarity with farming and with agriculture. Their lead counselors, Becky Kopp Dunham, she does a great job. But most of those sessions are telehealth. So someone can have a counseling session in their pickup truck, their tractor, or their kitchen table, and have an experience just without having to go through the challenge of maybe driving a significant distance or things like that. So important to understand. So I'd like to get to my last couple of questions and then some resources. One question we often get is, can you help me understand depression? Well, depression is a brain-based illness or condition. So it's just a medical condition. I like to help people understand depression is a medical condition, just like diabetes is a medical condition. And it can occur as a result of a variety of factors. Some people are more susceptible to it with their genetic background. It's more common in some families. That's true in my family. My dad was a big 6'2" guy, like I said, cowboy, rancher. He experienced depression. He looks like the Marlboro Man, but he experienced depression, went to a counselor for it, and was able to kind of work through that. Had a couple experiences of that in his life. I've had that in my life. I don't feel any shame about that. Depression is a medical condition, just like any other medical concern that can be very much managed. Some other reasons it may occur is if people have an experience of trauma or PTSD in their background, some significant life stressors like we've talked about in agriculture, or just major challenging life events like a job loss or a divorce. Millions of people have experienced depression and millions have recovered from it. But it's quite common. About 4 to 5% of the adult population in the United States experiences depression in any given year. But research we've done in agriculture shows that about between 15 and 25% of folks in agriculture are experiencing mild to moderate depression at any time. The rate is 3 to 4 times higher for people working in agriculture. It does not tend to get better by people saying, just tell yourself to feel better or pull yourself up by your bootstraps. The number one prescription to make progress with depression is to see a medical professional. Any healthcare professional will do. They deal with a wide range of health concerns, including mental health concerns. So that's kind of some information about depression. Now I want to jump ahead a little bit. I'm to question 8, but I'm going to go ahead to question 10. What are some available sources of support? And then we'll have a couple of minutes for any questions. Some good available sources of support in North Dakota. You can call 211, which is a statewide 24-hour helpline for human services and referral, as well as crisis line counseling. It's administered by First Link. So that's a very good resource to connect with any type of health provider or other provider in any region of the state. The second thing is encourage people to begin with a local healthcare provider or mental health professional. And that's a good starting point just to get an assessment done and a baseline to see how they are doing. And then third is if there's concerns about feelings or intentions related to suicide, the number to call is 988. That's the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, and that's a really good starting point. If you're looking for a variety of resources, in the north central region of the United States, 12 states have come together to form what's called the North Central Farm and Ranch Stress Assistance Center. It's online, and all of these resources, including support groups, variety of different uh, uh, online resources, videos, publications, things like that, other trainings, all sorts of things are available at www.farmstress.org. Very simple, can go there, and there's a wealth of resources from Minnesota, Ohio, Missouri, Kansas, Iowa, South Dakota, just states all across this north central region. I mentioned already potential for counseling support for rural populations or ag populations in North Dakota through Together Counseling. You can contact my office or any local county extension office to refer to me, and we can get you connected with Together Counseling, or you can just go straight to their website, go to the Farm to Farm Counseling portion of their website, and you can get support through them. Other counseling supports include in North Dakota Regional Human Service Centers. There's 8 of them in regions all over the state, and they all provide counseling supports and substance abuse counseling and things like that. There's a number of websites that you might access through NDSU and other providers. NDSU Extension, we have a specific website on farm and ranch stress. We have one on drought stress. Minnesota Department of Ag also has one. Lastly, Red River Valley Farm Network has a great podcast series called the Transformation Podcast Series. Really good interviews with folks in agriculture and talking about how to manage health and stress kind of issues. I mentioned earlier, New Zealand has this great nationwide program called the Farmstrong Initiative. Really good resources. You might want to look that up. And then finally, the organization Farm Aid has a lot of great resources for farmers. So those are resources you might look to. This particular presentation that Amanda's going to make available will have my contact information here at the end. So feel free to reach out to me if I can be helpful in any particular way. Sorry, I've taken us close to the end of our time, but thank you. I'll stop sharing, and if you have any questions, you can go ahead and ask as we close out our webinar today.
Well, thank you, Sean. So I do have one question. So you've been, in this space since 1998. Have you seen like an increase in farmers or people in rural areas actually accessing this health and being more open to talk about it with somebody about, there's this stigma around rural health. Have you seen
Yeah,
it?
there's been a substantial change. Just like I mentioned early on, and I showed that worldwide, this conversation about the importance of mental health in agriculture is happening in nearly every country across the world. India, England, Australia, New Zealand, others. People recognize it's a very important priority. There's much more resources available today, and I mentioned a variety of them. And so I'd encourage people to recognize it, that prioritizing mental health is just as important as getting your crop in. It really is that important and needs to be part of the everyday conversation and how we practice. And we talk about health and safety every day in agriculture. So we're just broadening that conversation a little bit.
So there's a two-part to that question. So that's good to know that more people are opening and talking about and seeing awareness. Have you seen an actual decrease in like mental health or suicide in general? Or is it kind of just, obviously the
No,
stress is going to continue.
yeah, part of the reason it's such a concern is because we've seen increases. Now, COVID enhanced that quite a little bit, but the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention did research over a 20-year period from 2000 to about 2017 on suicide in the United States. North Dakota had the highest increase, 58% increase in suicide rate over that period of time. The majority of that is from rural male individuals. And so we're talking about our agricultural population. We've seen increases like that. That's why we continue to talk about it as a higher level priority, is because we've seen increases rather than decreases in some of those mental health concerns.
So one other quick question that came in. So going back to you guys did this forum in 2020
Yep.
during kind of COVID. Have you guys done another one since then to kind of compare how that's been like how COVID impacted that or plan to
Yeah.
do another one? I mean,
Yeah.
it's been about 5 years.
Yeah, we do those community forums across the state about every 5 years. So we actually have a couple rounds prior to that that emphasize similar issues. We saw it particularly as a higher issue during that round. Um, NDSU Extension will repeat those. We're 2025, so we're about 5 years forward from that, and so we're just going to launch another round of those in the next year, probably get some more feedback. Um, but you'll notice, for example, under Governor Burgum, that they had the Recovery Reinvented initiative to prioritize mental and behavioral health. That's an indicator when, your state executive and the partners around them prioritize it as a high level issue during their administration. Um, I think there's just a lot of indicators like that that show the importance of it and that leaders across the state are paying attention to it as an issue.
Well, thank you, Sean. It is 11:01, and to be courteous of everybody's time, again, I want to thank you for presenting. Uh, Again, if anybody has any questions or has anything that they want to reach out for connections, feel free to email him. I, again, will be providing his contact information in my follow-up email. Um, we also ask, please take the exit survey at the end. This really does help with the content that we present and try to make these webinars better for you. Again, the recordings are, if you just look for YouTube and Google search NDFU. Our next webinar will be on Thursday, April 17th on livestock risk protection. Again, with that, thank you everybody for joining us and hope to see you next month. Have a good day. Bye.